Hi everyone, welcome to Fisher's Shop. Now some of you may have noticed in my previous videos how I like to make finger joints or box joints on the table saw. I think they're fun to make and I think they look pretty cool too. But they come with a limitation, and that's that each finger can only be as wide as the kerf of the blade that's in the table saw. And that's fine for little projects, but for larger applications I think that would probably look kind of weird, and it would most definitely be difficult to manage. So I need something that's going to allow me to have the flexibility for custom width box joints. And there's some very intelligent and well-known YouTubers out there that have come up with some impressive designs for exactly that. However, I was looking for something a little bit more simple, and I think I got it. Let me show you what I came up with. So this is what I came up with. It's just a simple table saw sled, but with a modified back fence. The fence itself is made up of 3 different layers, and that allows for a carriage assembly to slide back and forth on the top of it. So if you're looking at it from the back, you can see the removable template, which is attached by these 2 knobs, and that fits on there just over the top of a key that is glued on to the back of the fence, which fits in the gaps of the template. So the way that this would work is that you would clamp in your stock and align the key so that it's just at the right side of one of the gaps. Make your cut and then nudge the carriage to the right just a little bit, 1 kerf width, and make another cut. And then repeat until you've hogged out the entire gap, and then you would just lift the whole carriage up and then move it to the next gap. Very simple, very straightforward. Let's build it and see if it works. So I got some plywood from a friend of mine, and here I am cutting it down to the dimensions for the main base. And then I take another piece and I cut it up into all the different various pieces that make up the fence and the carriage assembly, as well as the little stabilizer block that's in the front of the sled. Once I have that done, I get out my sander and I go to town. All the pieces were painted on one side and then had finish on the other, so it was a lot of work. Next, I need to make the runners. So I'm making these out of hardwood, oak to be exact. And the important thing is that once you cut them, they need to fit just under the surface of the table saw, so they need to be just shallow of the total depth. And you can see here that they fit just underneath there, about like a 1/16 or so left. So I put down a few nuts to hold them up above the surface, so that what I can do is spread a little bit of glue, and then I can drop the main base down on top. And I'm using the table saw fence there kind of as an alignment tool, and then I align it up towards the back so that everything stays square. And then I weight it down with a whole bunch of my other table saw jigs. Here I am trimming off the excess of the runners that protrude off, and then drilling some pilot holes and countersinking, and then driving in a handful of little wood screws, just so that there's no chance at all of these runners breaking off. And trying to do this by hand and carefully so I don't strip anything. So next I attack the thing with a sanding block on the runners, just so I can get it to be super smooth. And it wasn't quite there, so I get some paste wax and I wax up the runners and then basically the whole thing. And when I was done, it was super smooth. It was like sliding on glass. So the next bit is to start gluing up the stabilizer block that's in the front of the sled, and as well as all the other pieces. So once I got that clamped up and set aside, I inspect each one of the pieces and figure out which way I want to orient them, and then I just glue them all together. And then I also did the same thing for the carriage assembly too. So then I have these 3 pieces that I can put off to the side and let dry. Once they are dry though, I'll need to take off all the clamps, which is quite a chore in and of itself. But then I
take them over to the jointer because I need to flatten each side of the stabilizer block, the bottom of the fence, and then the top of the carriage assembly. Once they're flat though, I take the fence over and I cut a small slice off just so that the carriage assembly will slide very freely. Even if it's clamped, it will still move. And then with that done, it's time to glue it on. So I go ahead and smear on some glue, and then using a big construction square, I put that up against the fence on my table saw and then towards the back of the sled, so I can clamp down this sled fence and knowing that it's completely square to the saw. Next, I turn my attention to the stabilizer block and I draw on some arcs for the corners, and I trim those off on the bandsaw and clean things up on the disc sander. Then I can glue that on, clamp that down, and then I grab the carriage assembly and I can drill the holes for the tightening knobs, and then I need to countersink the front of those too, so I use a Forstner bit. So next I grab some plywood and cut that down, draw a couple circles on it, and I drill out the centers. Once that's drilled out, I can cut them out on the bandsaw and then take those pieces over to the disc sander and clean them up as best I can and make them perfectly round. And then I tried to chisel these out for the nuts, but ran into this problem.
Oh, crap! The whole thing came apart. Oh well. I gotta make these out of hardwood.
So I did. And I made them out of hard maple, and when I did that, everything worked really, really good. And I was able to chisel out the cavity for the square nut and get that pounded in on both of them. But they were a little too wide, so I had to trim them down on the bandsaw. So next I get out my router table and I need to make a jig to help me make these templates. So using pretty much the same construction, a main base with a runner and a back fence all glued together, I made it out of softwood, pine, and particle board just so that the router bit would cut through it very easily. So here you can see I'm making my first cut with the router bit just far enough so that the bit buries itself into the fence. And then I can make two keys out of hardwood, which are the exact same width as the router bit itself. Glue one in place, and then I can make my template. So I just make a cut, and then I move it over so the gap is straddling the key, and I make another cut, and I move on down the line. And I did this to make my 1/2 inch template and my 3/8 inch template. I did it both with 2 jigs in exactly the same way. So for the 1/8 template, I used my standard finger joint jig to do that, and that worked just fine. So with all 3 templates made, it was time to drill the holes for each of them so that we can mount them on the carriage assembly. Next, it's time to make the key. So I cut a little piece of walnut, which was exactly 1/8 inch thick, matching the kerf of the saw blade, and I tucked it into the 1/8 template so it would kind of act as a clamp and hold it in place for me. And then I just marked some lines on the back fence exactly where I wanted it, and I could drop it into place and let it dry. So here I am actually going to demo the unit. I take off the 1/8 and I put on my 1/2 inch template, tighten that down, drop the carriage assembly in place, put my stock in place, and I line it up using the spacer key to offset the one in front just enough. And then with everything set, I'm good to start cutting. Making my first cuts now, and then nudging the carriage assembly over just a little bit at a time. And then the beauty of this jig is that it lets you do lateral cleanups. And by that, what I mean is that once you've hogged out the entire gap of the finger joint, you can slide the carriage left to right over the top of the blade, and it cleans everything up and it makes it completely smooth. And having perfectly square fingers and gaps is what makes a perfect fitting finger joint. And here we are, popping it out, and my very first check, and boy was I pleased. Well, here is the finished jig, and I gotta say, I couldn't be happier. It works really, really well. And here are the 3 templates that I have so far. I have a 1/2 inch, a 3/8, and then a 1/8. But the beauty of this is that you can make any custom template that you want with any width finger. As long as you can get some consistency between the finger widths and the gap widths, then that's really all you need. So here are 3 samples of some joints that I made using this jig. Here's the 3/8. You can see it's a nice tight, solid looking joint, and it is. There's the 1/8, and then here's the 1/2 inch. And they all came out really, really good. So I'm pleased.
All right, well, it works. That's exciting. It's super simple and it's very versatile. I'm looking forward to trying out some new templates, and you know, I'm sure that there's some areas where it could be improved upon. One of them came to mind, and that's the whole clamping mechanism. It'd probably be nice if on the front of the carriage assembly, if I maybe ran a T-track and slid in some lever clamps, and that might be able to hold the material down a little bit better so that I can get more precise cuts. But overall, it works, and I'm pretty excited about that. I'm not going to sell these plans. I have no intention of making any money on this because, like I said, it's so simple. I'm sure I'm not the first person to think of this. However, I haven't seen anything like it out online. So if you want a copy of the picture of the plans with the dimensions to try it out for yourself, I'll leave something down in the video description. If this is your first time here, be sure to subscribe, hit like, and share. Consider sharing this video with your friends, okay? And we will see you back here next time. All right, take care. Bye-bye now. Each finger in the joint can only be as wide as the kerf of the blade that's in the Babel saw. The Babel saw? What? And that's why you can't use hardwood for your stupid templates. Enjoy making finger joints or box joints in the table saw. In the table saw, you make them in. You actually crawl inside of the table saw and make them. Idiot. Crap. All right, so it works. That's pretty exciting. Oh my gosh, quit jumping up on me.